Thank you, Acting Deputy President. And I just would also like to speak in favour of Senator Siewert's motion today, and I would also like to congratulate her on her strong advocacy on this issue. And like her, Labor has also calls on the government to immediately increase the rate of Newstart and Youth Allowance. As we note in the motion that's been presented to the Senate, this week's also Anti-Poverty Week, and the easiest action that we all can take to reduce income inequality and effectively reduce poverty in Australia would be to increase Newstart and Youth Allowance. There is an enormous amount of evidence available that shows the merits of lifting Newstart, and that shows the negative impacts of continuing to leave vulnerable people without enough income to survive. Earlier this year, I visited Osmond House in North Melbourne, a crisis centre that has recently been renovated in the north of Melbourne, a crisis and transitional accommodation facility for homeless Melburnians run by Vincent Care. The leadership team, when I met with them, made a point of describing to me how desperately low the rate of Newstart and Youth Allowance was, and the impacts that had, and had the risk for people living on the cusp of homelessness, and how it made getting back into a stable situation very difficult for people who had fallen into that black hole. In July, the CEO of CoHealth, one of Victoria's largest community health services, wrote to me and to share her organisation's concerns about the impact of the low rate of Newstart and what that is having on the health and well-being of vulnerable Victorians. She told me that the people trying to live on Newstart, quote, cannot afford the costs of health care, meals are skipped, and fresh, nutritious food too is often out of reach. And the stress caused by worrying about paying for bills and keeping a roof over the head is a constant and significant issue. She also further quoted in that letter to me about an NATSM report that showed vulnerable people are twice as likely to have a long-term health condition, as well as twice as likely to suffer from chronic illness and will die on average 3 years earlier. In 2018, a Deloitte Access Economics report for the Australian Council of Social Services highlighted the inadequacies of the indexation arrangements that applied to Newstart. And I certainly touched on this area in my first speech in this chamber. And there's also a need to increase the length of time that people are a need to review the increasing length of time that people are spending on Newstart. And I know Senator Siewert made mention about 3 years on average, and it's a disgrace that people are having to wait that long of time in order to so-called transition into work. When this government keeps talking about reducing the unemployment rates, about the number of jobs that they supposedly create. But what we are finding is that there is a large cohort of people out there in the real world who are doing it tough and who are struggling to find meaningful work. And that same report also clearly laid out the inaccuracies in the government's position. The Liberal National Government like to claim that the low rate of Newstart encourages recipients to get a job. And they keep saying that the best form of welfare is a job. Well, a job is not welfare, and as we've also spoken in this place on numerous occasions, and I know in Senator Keneally's portfolio area that I've also been assisting her on too, a number of workers have been exploited and have been paid below the minimum wage. So for this government to sort of talk about there are all these jobs out there, well, where are they? People clearly are struggling to find work and to transition into some meaningful opportunities. What Deloitte's also found was that Australia has a very low Newstart payment, and when you compare that to other wages, the fact is that the rate of Newstart is way too low and acts as a barrier to people trying to find work. They cannot afford the transport to get to interviews. They can't buy the appropriate clothing or equipment. They can't even afford the training and education that they need to get back into the workforce. As respected ANU economist Peter Martin has pointed out in a piece for The Conversation just last month, It was a decade ago that the OECD, quote, warned that Newstart was low enough to raise issues about its effectiveness in providing sufficient support for those experience a job loss or enabling someone to look for a suitable job. And there's no guarantee that a job is even available. And earlier this week, we read that Anglicare's job availability snapshot, which showed that 5 job seekers applying for every entry-level position. And by their own admission, Anglicare says this is a conservative estimate because it does not include the 1.8 million Australians who say they are underemployed. It's hard to believe, and yet this is the situation that the Liberal National Government has created. They have made it almost impossible to find work while someone is on Newstart, while at the same time demonising Newstart and other welfare recipients for not getting a job. We are trapping people in poverty and then blaming them when they find it very impossible to get out of the black hole. On a human level alone, the evidence shows how critical it is that this government acts immediately to increase Newstart. The case for an increase to Newstart on an economic basis is also compelling. The same Deloitte Access report found that an increase of $75 a week would return about $1.5 billion a year in extra tax as recipients spend the increase and boost the economy. In June of this year, the Reserve Bank of Australia, Governor Philip Lowe, suggested that though it was a matter for the government, an increase to Newstart would help stimulate the economy, as would any increase to household income. I also noted that the Grattan Institute, that the government usually relies on for a number of their reports, also wrote a paper in July on this subject matter. And they described that there are many ways that the Treasurer could stimulate the economy. And surprise, surprise, they said a boost to Newstart would offer the economy an immediate stimulus. It puts money in the hands of the people most likely to spend every cent, is what the Grattan Institute said. Now, not to mention that the savings to the taxpayer would arise from the cohort of people who would likely be healthier and in more stable housing, better able to get a job and spend less time on welfare should they find themselves in the unfortunate situation of being without work. The list of people and organisations calling for an increase to Newstart is growing ever longer, and this includes some notable entries, including a number of Conservative MPs and senators in this place. They join organisations like the Australian Social Services, St Vincent de Paul, church groups and welfare advocates who have been arguing in favour of a rise in Newstart for many, many years. One doesn't have to search far to find the real-life stories from people who live experience of trying to make ends meet on Newstart. Now, look, today I wanted to fill my speech in this place with some words of others, and I do so because this issue is now beyond the rhetoric and political one-liners, the gotcha moments that those opposite constantly throw back at Labor and the Greens and others on the progressive side of politics. I want to lay out the voices and clear evidence calling for an increase to Newstart and give voice to those who are living every day on just $40 a day. And I bet a lot of us in this place would spend $40 a day just at Aussies, whether it be on coffee, cakes and other things for lunch and dinner. Madam Acting Deputy President, the time is well and truly past. For the sake of the people tonight who will go hungry and their children who will shiver in the cold, for the sake of people who are sick because they can't afford to get better, and for the many women who want to leave a violent relationship, all we do on this side of the place urge the government to immediately raise the rate